Hello, my name is Derek Atkins, and this is part 3 of the lecture on telling the better story, sexuality and gender. And this lecture is for the course Church, Society, and Ethical Issues in Asia at the East Asia School of Theology. So, in the first two parts of this lecture, we looked at the history of the LGBTQ movement. We looked at contemporary understandings of human sexuality and gender. We then looked at some LGBTQ interpretations of the Bible, and then we contrasted with what the Bible actually does say about human sexuality and gender. Then we looked at, we finally closed the second part of this lecture by looking at different parts of the LGBTQ agenda and seeing how that plays out in people's lives. Well, now in this last part, we're going to take all of what we looked at earlier, and we're going to see if we can craft a strategy for telling the better story about human sexuality and gender. So, how should we respond to LGBTQ people and the LGBTQ movement? First, it goes without saying that we should respond in a loving, Christ-like manner. Jesus reached out to all people, including sinners, because all of us are sinners. All of us have sinned against God, and all of us need God's forgiveness for the wrongs we've done. Those in the LGBTQ movement often criticize Christians as being hypocrites because we don't condemn adultery, divorce, and other sin to the same degree that we condemn LGBTQ behavior. This is a valid criticism because sin is sin, regardless of how serious it is. All sin separates us from a holy God. At the same time, there is a key difference between the sins that the LGBTQ movement is promoting and other sins. While other sins such as stealing, murder, lying, corruption, human trafficking, adultery, and divorce are awful and bring with them serious consequences, the disordered sexual practices promoted by the LGBTQ movement are an attempt to subvert God's created order. They are a denial of the reality of how God created our bodies and how God has ordered sexual relationships between humans. So, when a family member comes out as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, how should we respond? When confronted by an LGBTQ person, Christians often keep silent because they don't want to rock the boat or, quote, create a scene. But to keep silent is to go along with LGBTQ ideology. This approach is neither loving nor true. We must affirm the biblical narrative about sexuality and gender. In short, we need to tell the better story about sexuality and gender. This story can be told in 4 acts or 4 movements. And this will sound very familiar to you because we've talked about this during the first part of this course. Act 1 of the better story is creation. In Genesis 1 and 2, we read of how God created the first humans as male and female, and he called his creation of humans very good. In fact, he did not say the words very good until he created the first man and the first woman. That was when he looked at his creation and he called it very good. We see here that God created and values our bodies. Both men and women are equally created in God's image. In Genesis 2:24, we see that God instituted marriage as the relationship for the appropriate expression of sexual intimacy between husbands and wives. So, what is sex for? The purpose of sex is twofold: to create unity between husbands and wives, and to create children. Children are a natural consequence of sex between men and women, and therefore God ordained that sex should take place within marriage between husbands and wives so that children can grow up in families where they will be cared for, nurtured, and taught by mothers and fathers. So that's the first act of this better story, creation. The second act of the better story is rebellion. In the fall, humanity rebelled against God. Because of our rebellion, God's good creation has become corrupted. This corruption affects all aspects of creation, including relationships between husbands and wives, parents and children, men and women, as well as our feelings about ourselves and our bodies. This means that what we feel about our bodies and our genders may not always be true. This is why there is now conflict between husbands and wives, parents and children, men and women. This is also why there is so much confusion when it comes to the topic of human sexuality, because of the fall and the effects of sin that flowed out of the fall. So that's Act 2 in the better story, rebellion. Act 3 in this better story is redemption. By coming to earth as a human with a physical body, Jesus not only reaffirmed the value God places on human bodies, he also redeemed or rescued us from the eternal effect of our disobedience. Therefore, through Paul's writings, God has shown us that human marriage is now a living parable, a living picture of Jesus's relationship with the church, his glorious bride, whom he is preparing for the great wedding feast of the Lamb. This means that God is at work in our present world and in our present lives to reverse the effects of the fall and to restore the broken image within us. This work of redemption affects all areas of our lives, including our sexuality. However, we still live in a world where God's final victory has not yet taken place. So we now live in an in-between time, now but not yet, where God's work of redemption has begun and is ongoing, but has not yet been completed. Because we are in this now but not yet time, this means that we can and do face struggles between the old sinful nature that we still possess and the new nature that seeks to make us more and more like Jesus. We also face a struggle between the biblical teachings about human sexuality and the world's very distorted messages about sexuality. In our present cultural moment, our responsibility is to live out the countercultural message of God's purposes for sexuality and to live out the countercultural narrative of the Bible's better story about sexuality. For those who are single, this means living faithful lives of purity, thereby demonstrating what costly faithfulness to Christ looks like. And for those who are married, this means remaining faithful to our spouses and being the parent whom God has created us to be, if he does choose to bless us with children. And then we come to Act 4, renewal. Our glorious hope is in Jesus' second coming and in the resurrection that will take place when Jesus comes back. Jesus will then usher in the Messianic kingdom when he will make all things new. At that time, God will remove all the pain we currently experience in the area of sexuality and gender, and we will experience full and complete healing in this area of our life, together with all other areas of our lives. When we respond to our LGBTQ neighbors, we may not always have the time or opportunity to tell them the entire biblical narrative of human sexuality, but we can talk about those parts of it that are appropriate to the various conversations we may have with them. We must also continue to live out the saying, hate the sin, love the sinner. Many LGBTQ people hate this slogan because they view any rejection of their behavior as a rejection of them as people. But we must not give up this distinction between their behaviors and who they are as God's image bearers. Jesus loved them more than they can possibly know, and he died for each and every one of them so that they can have eternal life with him and be healed of all of their hurts forever. And this is the better story. So now we've looked at the better story. We've looked at contemporary ideas about sexuality and gender. We've looked at how LGBTQ theologians try to reinterpret the Bible to fit their ideology and their agenda. And we've also looked at what the Bible actually says about human sexuality and gender. We've also worked out how to tell the better story about human sexuality and gender. And so I look forward to seeing you in class, because in class, we will talk about this further. So if you have any questions, please come to class with your questions. I will have 1 or 2 case studies for you to talk about this issue. So come ready to talk about this issue. So I look forward to seeing you in class.